Spoilers: if you haven't seen the first episode of Prehistoric Planet and care about being spoiled about the inclusion of some critters, stay away from this video till you've seen it. Prehistoric Planet is now officially fully out on Apple TV Plus for everyone to enjoy. This whole project was, according to Dr. Steve Brusatte, about 10 years in the making. Precisely what that means in regard to exact start times, fundraising, and expert collecting all the way to the finished product is unknown. Surprisingly scant are references to the directors of the show, Andrew Jones and Adam Valdez. Aside from the artists doing all the hard hands-on work with the dinos and the paleontologists guiding their hands, the directors are the most important in regard to how the show is shot, how the animals are portrayed, and much more. The show is also produced by BBC Studios' Natural History Unit in conjunction with Jon Favreau of Iron Man, Chef, Lion King, The Mandalorian, and Jungle Book fame as executive producer and showrunner. The visual effects were done by the Moving Picture Company, with narration by David Attenborough. The soundtrack was composed by Hans Zimmer, Kara Talv, and Hans Rosman. Talv and Rosman even invented and modded new instruments for the show in order to make some truly amazing sounds to mirror the truly amazing science going into this series.
And I also want to show you the Fat Rex that we use for our Velociraptor theme.
I don't think it is exaggerating to call Prehistoric Planet not just a successor to Walking with Dinosaurs, but a superior production, aided by Hollywood money and cooperation among everyone involved. No one's expertise was thrown out by executive meddling or a director's personal preference. It would be a crime not to shout out the animators and CGI artists that worked on this project. Something Apple and BBC apparently couldn't spare the time to do with their credits. Shashank Shekhar is a texture and visual effects artist that worked on the project for 1.5 years, specifically working on the Velociraptors, Coorthoraptor, Therizinosaurus, Beelzebufo, Ornithomimus, and Troodonts. Another artist that went uncredited is Cameron Clow, who is a creature animator and pre-viz, post-viz artist for Marvel, HBO, and BBC. On top of that, he is a part-time animator for Prehistoric Kingdom, hence the quite lifelike movements. He worked on the Triceratops segment, as he has more expertise in the muscles, movement, and life appearance of these guys. Torosaurus is his favorite dinosaur after all. Sanjay Singh worked on some of the main animals, like the Tarbosaurus, Caesarosaurus, and more, with the Moving Picture Company. Alan Bolkas was also with the Moving Picture Company, with Damien Guy-Munoz and Anthony Sieben, and supervised by Dan Zelks. Michaela Dahl, who goes by Silvery Lantern on Twitter, and Sean Lack, or Momentarily Epic on Twitter, were also animators brought on board the team. I'm confident that I'm missing some people here, as this project was a monumental effort by a monumental team. Unfortunately, there is only so much I can do to find everyone involved when the show kinda made very little effort to highlight those same people, so I apologize to those I have left out. Unfortunately, the caveat for the whole series is that it only takes place 66 million years ago. However, it takes us all over the world to show us animals that the general audience has never seen before. It also has to show you animals you know, but thanks to 20+ years of new information since Walking with Dinosaurs, these old favorites are refurbished to show the audience how much the hard science of paleontology has changed. It also doesn't take place precisely at 66 million years. It is stated to be 66 million years for simplification, but it takes place between 72 and 66 million years, just for clarification. These are the most accurate prehistoric animals ever to be recreated in video form. Each episode covers a biome across the planet rather than a chunk of time. It was a 5-night event with 5 episodes each coming out on each of those 5 nights. The first episode was Coasts, so without further ado, let's get into a thorough walkthrough of Prehistoric Planet. Recap. The Coasts episode opens up on a shot of a cast replica of the skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus known as Stan. This guy being housed at the Natural History Museum at Oxford. Many experts from here were involved with walking with dinosaurs back in the day, and it remains home to models made using the molds used to make the puppets used in the series, like these heads of Tyrannosaurus, Ornithocheirus, and Tapejara. Fun fact, this is also the museum used in the BBC-affiliated mockumentary Dragons, a Fantasy Made Real. Anyway, from Stan we next meet the narrator of the series, Sir David Attenborough. He introduces the show to us and helps to bring us back in time, to the very end of the Mesozoic era. Once we leave the museum, we are treated to the series' awesome intro. This includes some of the clips we have seen in the trailers and teasers, and the wonderful intro theme. Hans Zimmer and company really popped out a banger, and kept popping them bangers out for the whole show. The meat of the episode opens on a beach largely devoid of animal life. A major thing I love about this series that didn't do it for me in Planet Dinosaur is that they filmed on location. All of the backgrounds are real pieces on Earth that just so happen to look like many places 66 million years ago. Thanks to using mostly real locations, the filmmakers were able to fake dinosaurs causing real reactions to the environment. We get some awesome Tyrannosaurus footprints on the beach. Notice that they aren't perfect cookie-cutter prints, they are imperfect to reflect how footprints are actually made. A small detail, but one that adds credibility. David tells us these are the southern shores of the Great Inland Sea of North America. That would make this the shallow western interior seaway that split North America down the middle throughout chunks of the Cretaceous period. It started to recede by the latest Cretaceous, but was still present in certain parts of the continent. From there, we are treated to the ungraceful image of an adult Tyrannosaurus swimming with its 5 youngsters trailing it. David explains that it is the powerful hind limbs and the hollow bones of the Tyrannosaurus that allow it to swim effectively. Papa Hank brings his 5 feathered Muppets to an offshore island in pursuit of food. The camera moves under the water to show us some giant turtles and tiny fish, as well as a mosasaur. From here, you can pretty much guess what's gonna happen. The mosasaur attacks and kills one of the babies without much fanfare. Realistic! Once they make it to shore, with one less Muppet baby, we are treated to some live-acted animals in the form of a hermit crab. The Tyrannosaurus family went to the island to get a nice meal of turtle as they smelt it from the mainland. Once Hank serves up some turtle soup, his babies go for a run. Here they interact with real baby turtles. Then we're off to the next segment of the episode. We are treated to some beautiful footage of modern animals standing in for their late Cretaceous cousins and ancestors. After taking a quick dip under the waves to learn of the biodiversity of extinct forms of modern ocean squishies, we hard cut to where the ocean meets the land. After a few photobombs by seagulls, we are treated to one of the most realistic recreations of pterosaurs ever put to screen. As David states, this is a nesting colony of multiple species of pterosaurs on the coast of North Africa. David states 7 species, but we meet 4: Barbaridactylus, Alcione, Tethydraco, and Phosphatodraco. The pterosaurs nest in large numbers out in the open of the beach to protect their young from predators, such as the Ashtarchid pterosaur, Phosphatodraco. The Alcione don't lay their eggs on the beach colony, instead they do it on the cliffs out at sea. We see them hatch en masse and fly from the cliffs to the protection of the nearby forests, only to be picked off one by huge Barbaridactylus. Then we're off to another sea in another part of the world, New Zealand. we meet a pod of Tuarangisaurus, a large marine reptile belonging to the Plesiosaur group. We zero in on a mother and child pair as they make their way to a special bay to gather, eat, and swallow stones they use as ballast and gastroliths. After a little bit of hanky-panky mating dances, we leave again to another sea somewhere else and some more footage of modern stand-ins for extinct fauna. In true Planet fashion, we get time-lapse or sped-up footage of corals, anemones, and more curling up, sifting food from the ocean, and more. This reef is the location for our next section, Mosasaurus Spa Day to the death. Here we see what David calls a Hoffman's mosasaur, or Mosasaurus hoffmanii, come to get cleaned by a fish and shrimp on a bare patch of reef. After some cleaning, rolling down in the deep, and basking at the surface, our red-headed whale lizard is attacked by another mosasaur, a territorial battle. They do some wrestling, nipping, and biting, but neither are seriously injured, and the victorious red-colored mosasaur goes back to his peaceful spa. Next up is one of the most gorgeous segments in this episode, and possibly the series. As we move away from the Mosasaur Spa Day to the death, it becomes nighttime, but something blue is stirring down in the deep. Ammonite mating disco dance party. We are told that these Scaphitid ammonites have bioluminescent cells in their skin, akin to many modern cephalopods from many different groups. Here, the backboneless weirdos gather together and lock arms with their partners to do some wavy glow dances. Yada yada yada, they do a little dance, make a little love, get down tonight, squirt out some sperm and some eggs, and that's that. Once their job is done, they wash ashore, dead as takoyaki, and we move back to New Zealand and the Tuarangisaurus pod. It's unclear if these are the same mother and calf from the first segment. The mother is slowing down for an unknown reason, and that draws the attention of the mosasaur, Kaikaifilu. The calf distracts and nips at the predator to distract it from the mother while she gets away to the safety of the pod. Turns out she's pregnant and gives birth to a 10-foot baby. As David says, one of the largest bibbies of all time. That was Coasts. Tell me what your favorite segment is from this episode in the comments section below. Onward to meat and potatoes, the reason you're here. Animal accuracies, or not. The point of this whole endeavor was to show what the public knows as the main characters of the late Cretaceous, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and the marine reptiles, in as natural and accurate a light as modern science and technology could make possible. To marry the groundbreaking technology produced for and used in the film industry to bring back the long dead with the help of cutting-edge dinosaur science. As such, every single critter should be as up-to-date as studies and fossils will allow, and any sort of soft tissue structure or behavior should be backed up with as much parsimony as possible. Has Prehistoric Planet succeeded in this venture? Well, in order to answer this question, we must first painstakingly approach each and every design with information from the literature, the fossil record, and from the very words of the scientists who were consulted for the project. Kirsten Formoso, Professor Steve Brusatte, John Hutchinson, Robert Spicer, and Paul Valdez, Doctors Darren Naish, Mark Whitten, Victoria Arbour, Alexander Farnsworth, and Scott Hartman. Tyrannosaurus Design. Tyrannosaurus has undergone the least most changes over the last few decades. By that, I mean the bones and their reconstruction have not changed much, but the outside details of the animal have quite a bit, but only in smaller details that someone unfamiliar with the literature may not even notice. Here, all of those details are laid bare for all to notice, or not. Hence my confusion as to why it was never touched on, especially considering how famous the animal is. The most famous incarnation of the Tyrannosaurus is everyone's favorite Rexy of Jurassic Park. This is how most paleontologists and paleoartists of the 1980s through to the early 2000s reconstructed Tyrannosaurus. The T-Rex that appears here in Prehistoric Planet has more muscle, fat, and tissues. This is based on about 20 years of research on the bones of Tyrannosaurus and comparisons and inferences made using modern animals and increasingly well-preserved specimens of close T-Rex relatives. So, Specifically, we see that the torso of this Tyrannosaurus is much deeper and wider than the Jurassic Park animal. All non-avian dinosaurs, like their crocodilian cousins, had a set of ribs which rested within their belly. They are commonly called belly ribs, or anatomically referred to as gastralia. These helped protect the belly and played a part in breathing. As more Tyrannosaur specimens have been found, from the 90s to now, it has been found that Tyrannosaurus had an extremely deep chest, trunk, and pelvis. A full set of gastralia would have started here at the extremely deep and wide pubic boot, and would have continued here until the shoulder girdle here. On top of this, Tyrannosaurus easily had one of the widest, most barrel-shaped torsos of any terrestrial predator to ever live. I mean, look at this chunker. They are literally big-boned. On top of being big-boned, they had the bony scaffolding that strongly suggests, and correlates to, enormous leg muscles. This part of the pelvis, the ilium, was huge and scooped. Here would have been where those enormous thigh muscles attached and pushed and pulled along the bulging calf muscles. The face of this Tyrannosaurus is probably the most obviously updated of the whole thing. You have keratinous hornlets on this part of the eye socket and this part. They sort of grow into one another to form a more prominent brow ridge. Not quite as copyrightably exaggerated as the Jurassic Park design, but still quite prominent. I would not be surprised if the real animal may have had even larger or pointier crests here. Another chunk of keratin is here on the ridge along the snout. I find it kind of a weird design choice to keep them conservatively colored. It has been a somewhat speculative hypothesis over the years that the keratinous nose ridge and hornlets of not just Tyrannosaurus or the other tyrannosauroids, but of most theropods, may have been brightly colored in a similar way to the keratin which adorns the faces of many species of birds today. In this way, they may have had many visual functions: individual identification, species recognition, mate selection, and more. Some research, some of which included Dr. Darren Naish, found that sexual selection was the most parsimonious explanation and primary driving force behind the exaggerated facial crests of these animals, as well as the crests and horns of other dinosaurs like the ceratopsians, ornithopods, thyreophorans, and more. A more recent study by soon-to-be Dr. Sarah Davis and Dr. Julia Clark found that a more likely part of the body to be brightly colored may have been the face and feet. They studied the presence of carotenoids in the skin of a bunch of living and extinct reptiles, birds, dinos, turtles, crocs, and more. Carotenoids are the pigments responsible for expression of bright yellows, reds, and oranges. Heavily simplifying, they concluded that there is about a 50% chance that carotenoid expression in skin and non-feather keratin was present in the most recent common ancestor of the archosaurs, the group including dinosaurs, birds, pterosaurs, crocs, and more. Feathers would not have been the best bet for bright colors. Instead, the skin on the legs and feet, the chest and neck, and the face are better supported by the data. Though it was also found that the theropod dinosaurs that deviated from a strict carnivorous diet may have had a higher probability for these brightly colored feet, necks, and faces. As such, the lack of color on the face or crests of Prehistoric Planet's Tyrannosaurus falls under a sort of gray wiggle room. I personally would have liked to see these areas more colorful, but it is not inaccurate to keep them conservatively gray. Aside from the crests, you see the critter has a set of lips. This has been a semi-contentious issue in the last few years. The only reason for this is due to a few experts concluding a lower probability of the presence of lip-like tissues on the face. The vast majority of the scientific community agrees that lip-like tissues are more likely because nearly every single terrestrial animal has some sort of covering on their face to conceal their teeth. The major exceptions are those that evolved ways around teeth. If you have a beak, you probably don't have teeth too. The biggest stick in the craw of the lip v no lip discussion is that the only living cousins and descendants of the non-avian dinosaurs evolved away from the condition of most non-avian dinosaurs to such a degree that they no longer offer a good comparison or control group. All birds have no teeth, a beak, and no lips. All crocodilians have no lips. We can throw birds out of the discussion altogether because of the beaks. Crocs should also be thrown out due to how distantly related they are to the dinosaurs and for their highly derived body plan and habit. In fact, the only known group of dinosaurs to be anything like crocs were the Spinosaurs, and even here they only share the most superficial of characteristics. A handful of researchers have directly compared the holes which poke through the face bones of most non-avian theropod dinosaurs to those of the crocodilians. They do share some similarities, but I'm not sure the comparison is that apt considering how distant crocs and theropods are phylogenetically and how different their ecology was. Instead, many researchers favor the dino face holes as passageways through which blood vessels were routed to provide sensitivity to the snout and blood to lip-like tissues. Many have balked at the inclusion of lips on theropod dinosaur reconstructions as they conflate these lip-like tissues with the lips of lizards or mammals. However, though they may have shared some mechanical similarities, the lips of the theropod dinosaurs would not have been the exact same type of structure. They were not like mammal lips and would not have allowed the theropod to snarl. They were probably more like the lips of lizards, being immobile and simply to seal moisture within the mouth. Even here, I would caution away from direct comparison to lizards, as the lips of theropod dinosaurs could not have been the exact same type of tissue either. Prehistoric Planet's Tyrannosaurus walks the line quite nicely. They even gave it vertically aligned rows of feature scales along the snout, mirroring the holes within the bones. Tyrannosaurus eyeballs would have looked quite small compared to the vast heft of the animal. Despite these proportions, the eyeball was absolutely massive in gross overall size. They were about 8 centimeters in diameter, about 4 inches. That's roughly orange size depending on what kind of orange you are familiar with. This is bigger than most terrestrial animals alive today and would have gifted the animal with incredible sight. Here, the Prehistoric Planet people have given the animal rounded bird-like pupils. Unsurprisingly, the pupil shape of the extinct dinosaurs is pretty much a complete unknown. There is a clear relationship between ecological niche and the shape of the pupil in most animals alive today, which would certainly have been true for the animals of the past. Herbivorous animals are more likely to have horizontal pupils than are predatory animals. Diurnal animals are more likely to have circular pupils than vice versa, and so on. This may be why, here, that the Prehistoric Planet team gave the Tyrannosaurus rounded bird-like pupils, inferring that they think it may have been a diurnal predator. Though there may be some evidence of its day versus night habits within its brain case, I don't think a study of this kind has yet to be conducted. Interestingly enough, Jurassic Park did the same with their Tyrannosaurus. In some shots, you can see a thin covering of hair-like feathers on the back of the head, neck, and some of the rest of the top of the body. Whether or not Tyrannosaurs had feathers has been another oft-discussed idea. Biggest problem is the lack of direct evidence. No Tyrannosaurus specimen has ever been found with skin or feather impressions. The exception to this was a tiny patch of scale impressions on one specimen. There are rumors that more impressions were preserved in this specimen but are yet to be described, and other rumors suggest bigger sections of skin may have been found on other specimens, but they remain rumors. The tiny chunk of skin that has been found reflects only scales, but the way it was preserved would not have preserved feathers if they were present. It also comes from a part of the body that probably wouldn't have been feathered if the animal even had feathers. Well, that's just great. Phylogenetically, or who and what it is related to, suggests that Tyrannosaurus would have been a good candidate among dinosaurs for a coat of feathers. It was a Tyrannoraptoran, cousin to the Maniraptor group. Maniraptorans include the vast majority of direct fossil evidence of feathers. Dromaeosaurs, birds, Alvarezsaurs, Therizinosaurs, Scansoriopterygids, Troodontids, and Oviraptorosaurs. That pretty much means feathers were ancestral to the Tyrannoraptora group. On top of that, a large tyrannosauroid, Eutyrannus, had feather impressions preserved with the skeleton. This opens up an evolutionary reason to suspect Tyrannosaurus may have had feathers. Then comes the thermal properties. Feathers can function to keep an animal warm, similar to, but not exactly like, the hair or fur of mammals. Unlike mammals, feathers can also function to cool down an animal or to just keep a constant body temperature regardless of the environment. Birds of the tropics and deserts have feathers. Then again, these are small animals, and many theropod dinosaurs were as large as or bigger than the largest modern mammals. Some researchers suggest there is a size threshold where feathers become detrimental to the organism. Other researchers suggest this may not work with organisms as distinct as the non-avian theropod dinosaurs. Here, the Prehistoric Planet crew give the adult Tyrannosaurus only a sparse elephant-like covering. This episode also introduces us to a set of Tyrannosaurus younglings. Unlike the adult, these guys have a much heavier coat of fluffier feathers. This has been hypothesized for quite some time, that it was the young of large feather-possible non-avian theropod dinosaurs that carried a coat of feathers. Besides that, the design of the T-Rex younglings match what is known of Tyrannosaurus and Tyrannosaur young to a T. They were more lightly built with longer legs, less muscle and fat, and longer, skinnier snoots. Behavior. In the Coasts episode, we are treated to a few behaviors hypothesized for Tyrannosaurus. We are first introduced to the Tyrannosaurus as it is leading its chicks from one island to another, or from the mainland to an island. The uncovered episode for Coasts decided to focus on whether or not Tyrannosaurus could swim. I understand why they chose this particular thing to explain. It has never been shown on screen before. This whole show is an exercise in subversion of expectations on how the dinosaurs and company lived and looked. A swimming Tyrannosaurus may seem strange to the general audience, but nearly every living terrestrial animal alive today has the ability to swim. It would be disadvantageous to lose this ability when over 75% of the world's surface is covered in water. This is explained in the case of Tyrannosaurus by Tyrannosaurus having hollow air-filled bones that would have kept it buoyant as it swam. It also had extremely powerful leg muscles to power it. That's all the explanation necessary. A point many dino enthusiasts lost in the sauce brought up was whether or not Tyrannosaurus would have visited the beach at all. Dr. Darren Naish has gone on the record saying this segment takes place on the east coast of the ancient western continent of Laramidia. During much of the Cretaceous, North America was split down the middle by a shallow inland sea as there were no ice caps. Though this inland sea was receding by the time Tyrannosaurus took over the continent, it was still there. The rock layers suggest there would not have been much in the way stopping Tyrannosaurus from living near or visiting the east coast of this half of North America. So there. David Attenborough notes that Tyrannosaurus laid clutches of up to 15 eggs at a time. It is known that non-avian theropod dinosaurs were capable of making and laying 2 eggs at a time. The fossilized nests of other theropod dinosaurs show they laid them in circles like this. Thanks to a complete lack of fossilized Tyrannosaurus nests, the precise number of eggs per nest is unknown, but the 15 number was achieved from other relatives whose nests have been found. The Prehistoric Planet team interpret the Tyrannosaurus as a semi-caring parent. Hank here doesn't exactly teach his kids how to hunt, nor does he provide the best supervision. He also makes sure he eats before his kids do. It is sort of a mashup of how crocs and birds take care of their muppets. Crocs are extremely protective of their nests and eggs and will stay with their young once they hatch for a bit, but after that short period of time, the babies are on their own. Most birds have to raise their young till they can fly and find food for themselves. I think the way Tyrannosaurus is portrayed here is pretty good to what is known of these animals' parenting capabilities. Hank took his kids to this island to chow down on a dead 2-ton turtle. It was really cool of them to show how difficult it was, even for a hunk like Hank, to push over the turtle to get to the meat on the belly. As strong as they were, no one wants to put every single ounce of strength into messing with their food. Thankfully, I don't have to cover the design of Tyrannosaurus again when it shows up in later episodes. That would be exhausting, and this episode is long enough as is. Let's go on to the next animal. Protostegid turtle. Design. As Hank brings his kids to the island, the camera goes beneath the waves to reveal some protostegid turtles, the same turtles that appear on the beach once the dinosaurs reach the island. These guys go unnamed, though they look quite similar to Archelon, the largest protostegid and largest turtle to ever live, as well as Protostega. Archelon itself lived before the time this series and episode was set, but many similar turtles to Archelon within the Protostegid group thrived right up until the end. Protostegids did not differ much in their overall body plan, so what we see here represented in this generic Protostegid is what is seen in many other Protostegids. They had soft shells like the leatherback turtles of today, with huge bony skulls with long hooked beaks. I'm no turtle expert, but everything here seems to be pretty spot on to what is known of these turtles. Thanks to these guys having relatively close living relatives, and thanks to turtles overall not changing too drastically over time, this one might actually be closer to what the real animal looked like than any dinosaur throughout the series. We see some baby turtles hatch and try to make it to the sea, only to be pounced on by the Tyrannosaurus young. These guys are live-acted sea turtle hatchlings. They look to be either Olive Ridley or Loggerhead hatchlings. As such, they do not look like the offspring of Protostegid turtles. However, it is never directly mentioned if these hatchlings belong to the Protostegids we see on the beach, so you could headcanon your way out of this potential inaccuracy. To be clear, the groups of sea turtles alive today date back to before the time the series is set, so modern turtles were around at this time. Pterosaurs. In comes the Pterosaur segment. Having had some of the world's most renowned pterosaur experts on the consultant team, like Drs. Mark Witten and Darren Naish, the pterosaur anatomy is perfectly reconstructed here to what is known of them. Many have questioned why the pterosaurs in this series fold their wings up so tightly that the ends look like spiny fingers. This question arises from a paleoart meme in which the end of the pterosaur wing is reconstructed as lobe-like or spoon-shaped. This was touted, even by me, as the accurate way to reconstruct the wingtip after the new dino renaissance of the 2010s as a result of the All Yesterdays book and movement. This meme is just that, a meme, and not really based on any data collected from the bones. The fact is that pterosaurs could adjust their wings better than bats can today. The arm bones were invaded by huge air sacs which, in conjunction with the huge muscles, would have made the wings themselves rather thick. On top of that, the wings were made up of different layers of tissues. One of those layers contained a special type of fiber, actinofibrils, that cross-hatched the other wing tissues and themselves. They allowed the animal to relax or tense the wing as desired. The wing itself was kept in an outswept angle when flying, almost a Superman pose. All of this is shown in the Prehistoric Planet pterosaurs and makes them the best they have ever looked. Perhaps even more than the dinosaurs, since pterosaurs rarely get proper attention. An interesting aspect of pterosaur biology, which was briefly noted by David, and which has been known for a while but firmed up recently, is what the hell kind of eggs these things were laying. Turns out these critters laid soft-shelled eggs like crocodiles and turtles. We never see the Alcione eggs in this episode, but they are referred to as soft-shelled. We do see pterosaur eggs in the freshwater episode, but I'll save that discussion for that episode. Alcione Design. In the pterosaur nesting colony sequence, we see many species and different growth stages of pterosaurs. The Alcione shows up primarily in the form of twitchy precocial flaplings, trying to make it from their rocky ocean nesting platforms to the safety of a nearby coastal forest. The adult form shows up in the backgrounds of a few scenes. The remains of Alcione, as well as the rest of the pterosaurs in this sequence, were dug up in a single dig site over a 3-year period, which unearthed about 200 pterosaur specimens. The good bit with Alcione is that it is known from a handful of specimens. The problem is that these specimens are rather fragmentary. Only the lower jaw is known of the animal, as well as various pieces from the shoulder girdle, the wings, the sternum, and bits of the legs. Not quite enough to give a good idea of what an adult, or even a hatchling, would look like. Why, one might ask, would the team decide to use these pterosaurs if their fossil record is so shoddy? The dig site from which they came indicates something ecologically extraordinary. A nesting colony. The Prehistoric Planet team evidently wanted to show such a congregation of flying reptiles more than they cared about reconstructing a perfectly accurate Alcione, which, as far as I see it, is semi-impossible as of right now. This does not mean their reconstruction of it is completely being pulled out of thin air, nor does it mean the sequence loses any scientific rigor. Alcione was found to belong to the Nyctosauridae family by doctors Nicholas Longrich, David Martill, and Brian Andres in 2018. This is a group of rather seabird-like pterosaurs that stayed relatively small, tended towards huge head crests, and lost all of the fingers of the hand besides the single major wing finger. As you'll see, there are other nyctosaurs living with Alcione that need some patching up. We see the young hatch and leave their seaweed nests to climb up to the top of the ocean rock platforms to begin their journey. They are based on the known young of close relatives, as well as just general pterosaur hatchling anatomy. Nothing much to say here since most pterosaur hatchlings were pretty generic looking. The adult Alcione are never shown in great detail, but you can pick them out from the background in a few scenes. They are the ones with blue crestless heads and light gray bodies. They look appropriately nyctosaurid in anatomy and match what little is known of Alcione rather well. Behavior. The Alcione behavior of leaving the eggs in seaweed nests to hatch on their own and find their way to safety, a la turtles, is not pulled from nowhere, though it is applied to a genus of pterosaur whose nesting behavior is unknown. A 2021 paper by Dr. Naish, Dr. Mark Witten, and Dr. Liz Martin Silverstone found that some pterosaurs were born fully capable of powered flight. This indicates that at least some pterosaurs left their eggs to hatch and fend for themselves. The Prehistoric Planet team made sure to show different styles of parental care among pterosaurs in this scene to show the general audience that the pterosaurs were extremely diverse enough for different groups to employ different parental behaviors. Tethydraco Design. Tethydraco is not highlighted for long, but it is name-dropped. It makes up the majority of the adults and hatchlings in the beach's nesting colony. Attenborough notes how large their heads are, and they surely are. The skull is about as long as the body and neck together, and may even be longer. This is based on a similar thing going on with every single close relative of Tethydraco. Unfortunately, like with Alcione, Tethydraco is known from very fragmentary material, some ulnae, a humerus, and a thigh and shin bone. The authors that described the remains, the same team that described Alcione, and most of the pterosaurs from this segment of this episode, found them to belong to a pterannodontid pterosaur. That means it was related to critters like Pteranodon and Geosternbergia. Thanks to the very fragmentary remains, the Prehistoric Planet team could go in just about any direction they wanted for the design here. They opted for a nesting colony of mostly females, shown in the sexual dimorphism of their small crests and boring colors. Body size and crest differences are seen throughout most of the known pteranodontids, so this is highly plausible to have occurred in Tethydraco as well. It closely resembles most known pteranodontids, with a slightly upturned beak, medium-length tail, tiny body, and thick neck. Behavior. Not much can be said in the behavior department for Tethydraco, as they are not the main focus of the segment. That being said, they are shown as contrast to the sea turtle-esque parenting behavior of the Alcione. Tethydraco make nests on the beaches and guard their chicks from predators. This sort of massed nesting behavior is actually seen in the fossil record. There is a fossil nesting ground in the Hamai region of Zhejiang, China, belonging to Hemipterus. A Brazilian bone bed is known of Caiuajara that contains tons of individuals of varying ages, with a concentration of juveniles. There are also 750 specimens of the bristle-toothed South American Pterodostro, showing that they may have had nesting sites as well. Though comparatively little is known about pterosaur parenting behavior, enough is now known to show that different groups were doing different things. Phosphatodraco Design. Phosphatodraco is an Ashtarkid pterosaur found in the same Moroccan phosphate deposits as the last two pterosaurs. If you can believe it, this one is even more fragmentary than the rest. It is known from only 2 specimens of neck vertebrae. Despite this, the vertebrae of Ashtarkids are characteristic enough to determine Phosphatodraco as one of the gawky, long-necked, huge-headed freaks. As a consequence, the Prehistoric Planet team portray it rather conservatively, without the crests of other more well-known Ashtarkids. Based on the size of the neck vertebrae and known proportions of other Ashtarkids, Phosphatodraco is estimated to have had a wingspan of 5 meters, 16 feet when alive, so it offers more of a threat to the hatchlings of the beach colony than to the adults who guard them. It is here reconstructed with speculative red and yellow face patches, which contrast rather nicely against the light gray feathers. The anatomy is spot on for Ashtarkids, with the hand facing backwards as it walks and all that. Behavior. Phosphatodraco is shown to take advantage of the large congregation of pterosaur chicks. It is tall enough to maneuver in between nests and pick up unguarded young to pop in its mouth, like using chopsticks to munch popcorn. This is congruent with the terrestrial stalking feeding method proposed for a good amount of Ashtarkids, a method we will see again later in the series. Barbaridactylus Design. Our last pterosaur continues the trend of this Moroccan dig site with very little substantive skeletal remains. Barbaridactylus is another nyctosaurid pterosaur, but much larger than any of the remains known of Alcione. The most complete specimen, also the holotype, is a femur, a radius, ulna, humerus, the shoulder blade, and a chunk of the lower jaw. All other specimens are humeri. Kinda sucks, man. For those that may complain about showing off this ecosystem of partial pterosaurs, I must note the creators are trying to show the unique nature of the ecosystem, as well as the diversity in pterosaur body forms, more than they are trying to recreate these specific genera of pterosaurs perfectly. It also just so happens that these reconstructions are spot on in comparison to pterosaurs known from more complete remains. So criticism, though somewhat warranted, is largely moot in this particular case. Barbaridactylus is shown here with the typical nyctosaurid body plan, complete with a tuning fork-style antler crest jutting out the back of the skull, similar to Nyctosaurus itself. Since the full skull of Barbaridactylus is unknown, they went with a different shape of the crest to Nyctosaurus, but kept the overall antler idea to better provide a compare and contrast to the other pterosaurs in the segment. The uncovered segment for the deserts episode, which has a sequence dedicated to Barbaridactylus, shows a completely fabricated skull of Barbaridactylus in the museum library set with David. Though this skull is based on other close relatives and probably isn't that far off from the real Barbaridactylus skull, I do think it should have been pointed out that it is hypothetical. I think it would have been a good opportunity to compare it with the known skull of Nyctosaurus, to explain why they went with a Nyctosaurus-style head crest and why they did not do a segment with Nyctosaurus itself. The reason being that Nyctosaurus lived 87 to 82 million years ago along the Western Interior Seaway, thus making it out of reach of the time frame for the series. You can't really tell their color scheme or the level of feathering due to the lighting of the scene. When they appear again in the deserts episode, I'll touch on that. Behavior. In this sequence, Barbaridactylus was shown as a major predator to the Alcione hatchlings as they fly to the forest. Is there direct evidence of this from the Moroccan phosphate deposits? Well, no. There is barely enough to reconstruct some of these pterosaurs as is. Is there direct evidence that pterosaurs predated upon other pterosaurs? As far as I can find, there are no fossils of pterosaur bones within the gut cavity of another pterosaur. However, pterosaur remains are generally rare, so this is not a surprise. Some must have eaten other pterosaurs, and hatchlings would have been the easiest. Tuarangisaurus Design. The next animal to show up is the Tuarangisaurus. This is an elasmosaurid plesiosaur from New Zealand. Though of course when it was alive it did not live on New Zealand, nor is it impossible that they swam to other locations. The neck flexibility of these animals has been in question over the years. The most recent work suggests they had quite a bit of neck flexion, as in early paleoart depictions, giving them swan-like necks. However, they probably kept their necks in a more horizontal posture when at rest. Their necks were heavily muscled and not floppy or noodle-like. These guys are given a nice layer of fat to keep them warm and a small fin on the end of their short tails, as has been hypothesized in recent years. They are given a basic bluish color scheme with rather faint horizontal striping. It may have made some sense to give them a lightly colored belly to reflect the idea that many marine reptiles had counter shading, like most huge modern ocean animals today. Then again, that color contrast is more common among marine animals that spend most of their time in deeper water. Behavior. The first segment with the Tuarangisaurus depicts them swallowing ballast stones or gastroliths. The narration tells us they use them for ballast, but also to help grind up their food, since they lack the ability to chew up their food before swallowing. Gastroliths have been associated with plenty of extinct organisms through the years, but nowhere are they found as consistently in association with skeletons as in the plesiosaurs, much to my surprise. At this point, it is a verifiable fact these animals were swallowing stones in large numbers, even if an exact function has yet to be proven. Gastroliths really only have a few uses, so it's not hard to figure out here in the case of the plesiosaurs. But it's still difficult to say for certain. The Tuarangisaurus come back in a second sequence in this episode, in which a mother and calf are swimming along with their pod when they are set upon by a medium-sized Antarctic and potentially New Zealand mosasaur, Kaikaifilu. In this sequence, the calf distracts the predator by nipping and biting it so the mother can get away to the safety of the pod. This is behavior we see today in many marine mammals. It can be inferred to be possible for these marine reptiles due to the kinds of babies they had. A few adult specimens have been found pregnant with live young. These animals did not lay eggs. A few of these specimens preserve an absolutely enormous calf. The one in the show is said to be 10 feet 3 meters, making it proportionally the largest baby of any animal ever. Such a large baby suggests a lot of parental investment in the development of the calf, which suggests some level of sociality among the plesiosaurs. As such, the calf trying to save the mother and the pod coming to help is not at all implausible, nor impossible, though pretty much impossible to directly prove from fossils. Mosasaurus hoffmanii. Design. After we meet the Tuarangisaurus, we get to meet the star of my favorite segment of this episode, Mosasaurus hoffmanii. This is the largest species of the Mosasaurus genus, and the largest mosasaur ever known. The largest size estimates for these mosasaurs are taken from huge fragmentary chunks, so they should be taken with just a teensy bit of salt. Those sizes being up to 18 meters or 60 feet in length and probably tens of tons or more. David says the big male is over 15 tons, which is pretty hefty and not really based on any complete specimens known. Instead, it is estimated on those huge fragmentary chunks. PhD candidate Amelia Zetlov is one of the most preeminent mosasaur experts and has given a thorough rundown on the accuracy of Prehistoric Planet's mosasaur. It's good and bad. Since they specifically named the mosasaur Mosasaurus hoffmanii, and since a lot is known about this species, the details do not match up exactly. The tooth count is off. Mosasaurus hoffmanii had 14 to 15 teeth in the dentary bone, 13 to 14 in the maxilla, and 8 in the pterygoid. The one in the program seems to have 16 in the dentary bone, 12 in the maxilla, and 10 in the pterygoid. This is entirely outside the range of variation observed in known hoffmanii fossils. Now, this would not have been seen as an issue if the scene did not relate directly to the critter opening its mouth right in front of the camera, but whatever. According to Amelia, the tooth rows appear to have a bit of curvature to them, which has not been observed in any mosasaur. Instead, their teeth were arranged in a straight line from front to back. Their jaws were very geometrically perfect. The marginal teeth, these guys here, also seem to appear slightly too small, though I could see this as more of a nitpick or something explained away as individual variation. The flippers also appear to be too slender for Mosasaurus hoffmanii. They should be a bit bigger and thicker. Next up in Amelia's critique is that the skull shape isn't quite a match for this species. It appears to be missing the supraorbital process and pointed rostrum, both of which are diagnostic characters for mosasaurine mosasaurs, the group to which Mosasaurus hoffmanii belongs. Diagnostic refers to characteristics that are specific to and only found in the given critter. It is what sets them apart from other known genera or species. The muzzle and anterior mandibular unit, this guy here, are too short relative to the total skull length. As I'm not a mosasaur expert, I'm not sure how much some of these aspects can be explained away as being obscured by soft tissues or as individual variation. One detail you can't just explain away is the complete lack of external ear. Amelia states that this missing detail is odd as the external ear is present in living semi-aquatic to aquatic lizards like marine iguanas, caiman lizards, and monitor lizards. Mosasaurus is a marine lizard, so this is strange. Though I would like to point our attention to a semi-aquatic monitor lizard known for its lack of external ear, the aptly named earless monitor lizard. I'm not sure how this relates to mosasaurs though. The ear bones of mosasaurs are rather similar to those of the other modern marine reptiles, so this may point to a similar presence of external ears. With all of that said, this is still one of the best and up-to-date reconstructions of a Mosasaurus to date. It has relinquished the retro look of croc scutes, lumpy bodies, croc-like heads, or weird sails or fins of skin along the back and tail. Yes, Jurassic World's Mosasaurus is extremely outdated in many aspects. The designers even had the gall to mimic the known fleshy shark-like fin at the end of the tail using croc scutes. For shame. Prehistoric Planet's sea lizard is a hefty, massive, well-muscled beast, ready to tussle with others of its kind. Behavior. The Mosasaurus segment places the big red-headed male on a stretch of a reef devoid of coral. This is his cleaning station, and we see live-acted shrimp and fish, plus one extinct pycnodont fish, come to help clean away the male's dead skin in preparation for the mating season. This is definitely something that may have happened, but for which there is no direct fossil evidence for. It is healthy, scientifically backed speculation. Though I have to wonder if something like this could be fossilized. The scratching mosasaur had to have left behind marks on the reef that might infer its use as a cleaning station, but I digress. After a brief period of peace, the Mosasaurus is attacked by a younger, slightly smaller, rival male for access to territory. The fight ends with the first red-headed male the victor, and without the death of the younger male. These bouts of territorial fighting may very well have happened, but there is no direct evidence of territorial fights specifically. David makes note of a fossil mosasaur skull with tooth marks made by another mosasaur. Whether or not this evidence was left by territorial battles, cannibalism, or something else remains a mystery. Pycnodonts Design. A funny little fish is name-dropped as a pycnodont as it swims into the mouth of the mosasaurs to eat some leftover schmutz. This was a huge order of bony fish which first appeared in the early Triassic and lasted till the Eocene, and on every continent except Australia and Antarctica. They are known for their bodies that were flattened from the sides and their hide, which was covered in bony armor. They had jaws adapted to crush hard-shelled prey, and the pavement-like teeth to do it. This particular fish is left as a generic pycnodont. but the team modeled it after Scalacurvichthyes. This genus comes from Cenomanian rocks, so about 30 to 40 million years before this series. They made it as a hypothetical continuation of the lineage that lasted into the latest Cretaceous. Just so happens one species of Scalacurvichthyes was named after Dr. Darren Naish. All in all, it matches everything that is known of these fish. Thanks to their nearly complete remains, not much can be left to the imagination. Behavior. The little fishy swims on into the mosasaur's mouth to do some complimentary cleaning service. Yeah, that's not from direct fossil evidence, but inferred behavior from too many modern fish to count. Scaphitid Ammonites. Design. There's a sequence of a group of what is only referred to as Scaphitid Ammonites using their bioluminescent skin to communicate with one another and conduct some mating dances. The shell of these ammonites is rather similar to those of some species of the Scaphitys genus specifically, but it is obviously meant to be some generic and Cretaceous member of the group. A group which survived the mass extinction only to go extinct in the early Paleocene. Is there fossil evidence of the bioluminescent spots in the ammonite skin? No. Ammonites were around for 250 million years or more and lived worldwide. Their direct cousins are the squids and octopuses. The modern relatives of the ammonites have many examples of bioluminescence, so it seems almost mathematically impossible for some ammonites not to have had the same thing going on, given they've been around so long. What did the soft tissues of the ammonites look like? For the last 100 or so years, the answer was entirely speculative, unknown, and based on close relatives. That was until 2021 and a paper reanalyzing an ammonite fossil found nearly 20 years ago. This specimen was very well preserved, but it took a CT scanning to get the deets on the ooey gooey stuff on the inside. That internal stuff showed many of the major muscles and organs that filled the shell when the animal was alive. This found that ammonites had muscles that would help them retract into their shells for defense, something that was hypothesized for decades but never had any direct evidence to back it up. Then, another specimen was described in 2021 of what appears to be the soft parts of an ammonite splayed out roadkill style. Together, these specimens showed this sort of orientation. Many ammonites had a shelly cap that covered their heads. They were used to seal their shell when they retracted their bodies into their shell, and these new specimens show where this cap attached. As such, these Scaphitid ammonites represent literally the cutting edge of ammonite science and are the best ones ever put to screen, like a lot of things in this series. Behavior. Like with the bioluminescence, the mating dance of the vibing ammonites is entirely speculative for ammonites, but inferred from a bunch of living cephalopods that do this. Like I mentioned before, with 250 million years or more's worth of time to work with, I'm sure they evolved even stranger things than bioluminescence and disco dancing in the moonlight. Kaikaifilu. Design. Kaikaifilu is a tylosaurine mosasaur from Antarctica. This guy pops up really quickly in the end Tuarangisaurus segment to harass the pregnant mother. It pretty much follows similar design aesthetics and science as the Mosasaurus, though definitely has a more interesting patterning with blotches of dark and light colors as well as stripes. Perhaps they are trying to infer ecology with the color scheme of this mosasaur versus the Mosasaurus from earlier in the episode. They have Mosasaurus with an all-over tropical blue color with a lightish blue tan on the underside. The male also has a bright red patch on its head. The Kaikaifilu seems more adapted for deeper, darker waters, with a dark blue top and bright tannish white bottom. That makes perfect sense with its endemism to Antarctica and southern seas. Amelia Zetlov is back again with some minor criticism. Tylosaurine mosasaurs were different in a few key ways to the mosasaurine mosasaurs. The tylosaurs had rather pointed, elongate skulls with much longer tails. This Kaikaifilu seems to be a modified Mosasaurus model, as its head is more heavily built and it has a proportionally shorter tail. The science used for this show is groundbreaking. The speculative nature of a lot of the stuff shown is equal parts necessary and representative of the real world. Two of the main consultants, Drs. Mark Whitten and Darren Naish, helped to bring forth the modern dinosaur renaissance with their little paperback landmark book, All Yesterdays. I've made a two-part series of their work here on Edge that you can view to get a really good idea of the kinds of visions that team was trying to convey. With their work, they were not trying to say that speculation should be taken as gospel, or that those who cautioned conservativeness in reconstructing long-dead animals are wrong. Instead, their intention was to show the world that the animals of the past are as the animals of today, gross, complex, and alive. The world around us has only been around us for 1 to 2 million years. Before us, the modern paradigm has been around for 66 million years. Before that, there was an unfathomable expanse of time, 184 million years of time. If I wanted to really scramble your brain, there is an even more unfathomable expanse of time before that. But we're talking dinosaurs right now. For as alien as certain parts of the Mesozoic era may seem, the laws of nature retained their stranglehold. Animals of the Mesozoic had a much longer period of time to get gross and complex, so to think so narrowly as to only reconstruct the animals of the past as closely as their bones can say is to completely ignore everything we know about life. In fact, because of the much longer period of time that the dinosaurs had, it is nearly mathematically impossible to think they didn't get into weirder stuff than we see today. This seems to have been the driving force behind Prehistoric Planet, at least with the consultants and animators. I mean, we all know Favreau just wanted them to act like animals and look pretty. No shame or shade there. So, what did you think of Prehistoric Planet? This video is way too hefty to only now get into the music, cinematography, and directing, or my criticisms therein. I have just gone through every single aspect regarding the science behind this show based on the very sparse information we have right now. Darren's tweets and the uncovered segments can only tell us so much. I think I can speak for everyone that we are eagerly awaiting a behind-the-scenes documentary on the documentary. In the meantime, we can only imagine. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, hit the bell icon for updates, like this video, and drop a comment in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my elephant tier patrons, Ray, Isaiah Garza, Dinosaur, Christoph Hubinger, Biotaverse, and Arda Bayer. And another thanks to my Tyrannosaurus tier patrons, The Dogman, Iron Bladesman, Danny Van Heck, and Dana Manchester.